Welcome to this deep dive where we're exploring a topic that might send a shiver down your spine.
Okay.
Domoic acid.
Interesting.
You might be asking, what's domoic acid?
Yeah.
Well, you know how like some mushrooms can be poisonous? Domoic acid is kind of like that, but for seafood.
Okay.
It's a neurotoxin.
Right.
Produced by certain types of algae. And it can have some pretty nasty effects on the brain, especially when it comes to memory.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Domoic acid is what we call a marine biotoxin.
Okay.
It's produced by algae,
Right.
those tiny plant-like organisms that float in the water. And just like some land plants produce toxins to protect themselves, so do some algae.
So how does this domoic acid end up in our food?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't remember seeing toxic algae on the menu at my favorite seafood restaurant.
We wouldn't. The problem is that shellfish, like mussels, clams, and oysters, are filter feeders.
Okay.
They constantly strain water to get their food.
Right.
And in the process, they can accumulate domoic acid from the algae in the water.
Okay, so I see where this is going.
Right.
So we eat the shellfish, we ingest the domoic acid, and then what happens?
This is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
And a little scary. Domoic acid has a particular affinity for a type of receptor in our brain called glutamate receptors. These receptors are essential for communication between brain cells, playing a crucial role in learning and memory.
So it messes with our brain chemistry.
Yeah.
But how does that lead to memory problems?
Think of glutamate receptors like locks on the doors of brain cells.
Okay.
And glutamate, a neurotransmitter, is the key. When glutamate binds to these receptors, it opens the door, allowing signals to flow between neurons.
Okay.
Domoic acid acts like a rogue key. It also binds to these receptors, but instead of just unlocking the door, it jams it open.
Oh, wow.
Leading to overstimulation.
So instead of normal communication, the brain cells are getting bombarded with signals.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
This overexcitation causes a cascade of harmful effects, leading to cell damage and even death of neurons in areas of the brain critical for memory, like the hippocampus.
Yikes, that doesn't sound good at all.
Yeah.
So what happens to people who ingest domoic acid? What are the symptoms?
The condition caused by domoic acid poisoning is called amnesic shellfish poisoning.
Oh, wow.
Or ASP for short.
Okay.
It can range from mild gastrointestinal upset to severe neurological symptoms, including confusion, disorientation, seizures, and even coma.
Oh, my God.
In severe cases.
And the memory loss, how severe can that get?
It can be quite profound.
Really?
People with ASP can experience short-term memory loss, difficulty forming new memories, and even retrograde amnesia.
Oh, wow.
Meaning they lose memories from before the poisoning occurred.
So it's not just a case of forgetting where you put your keys. It's potentially losing entire chunks of your life's memories.
That's what makes ASP so frightening.
Wow.
It's a stark reminder of how vulnerable our brains are to toxins and how critical those glutamate receptors are for our cognitive function.
Okay, I think I need a moment to process all of this.
Sure.
So far, we've learned that domoic acid is a neurotoxin produced by algae. It can accumulate in shellfish. And when ingested, it can cause serious memory problems and even brain damage.
That's right.
What I'm wondering is, how common is this? Is this something we should all be worried about every time we eat seafood?
That's a great question. While ASP is a serious concern, it's important to remember that it's not a common occurrence. There are monitoring programs in place to test shellfish for domoic acid levels and ensure the safety of seafood sold commercially.
That's reassuring to know. So there are safeguards in place to protect consumers.
Yes.
But what about those who might be fishing for their own shellfish? How can they know if what they're catching is safe to eat?
That's where public awareness and education come in. Authorities often issue advisories and warnings when there are known blooms of toxic algae in certain areas. It's crucial for people to heed these warnings and avoid harvesting shellfish from those locations.
Right. There are also resources available online and through local health departments that provide information on how to identify potentially harmful algae blooms and how to stay safe when consuming seafood.
So it's all about being informed and taking precautions.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But what I'm still wondering is, how does this domoic acid actually cause such specific damage to the brain?
Yeah.
Is it just those glutamate receptors, or is there something more going on?
It's a fascinating area of research.
Okay.
And scientists are still uncovering the intricacies of domoic acid's toxicity. What we do know is that the overstimulation of glutamate receptors triggers a cascade of events within the neuron.
Oh, okay.
It leads to an influx of calcium ions, which in turn activates enzymes that break down essential proteins and disrupt the cell's energy production.
Essentially, the neuron gets overwhelmed and can't function properly.
So it's like a domino effect. One thing leads to another.
Yes.
And ultimately, the brain cells are damaged beyond repair.
That's a good analogy.
Wow.
And what makes domoic acid particularly insidious is that it can cross the blood-brain barrier, which is a protective shield that prevents many harmful substances from reaching the brain.
So this toxin has a free pass into the control center of our body.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
It can slip right through the defenses and wreak havoc on those delicate neurons. And the damage isn't always immediate.
Really?
Some of the effects of domoic acid poisoning, like memory impairment, may not manifest until days or even weeks after exposure.
That's scary. You might not even realize you've been poisoned until the damage is already done.
That's why it's so important to be aware of the risks and to take precautions when consuming shellfish, especially from areas where toxic algae blooms are known to occur.
So we've talked about the dangers of domoic acid and how it can impact human health. But what about the broader ecosystem? Does this toxin affect other marine life?
It absolutely does. Domoic acid can accumulate in other animals further up the food chain, like fish and marine mammals. Sea lions, for example, are particularly susceptible to domoic acid poisoning. And can experience seizures, disorientation, and even death.
Oh, my gosh.
After consuming contaminated fish.
So it's not just a human health concern. It's an environmental issue.
That's right.
That can have far-reaching consequences for marine ecosystems.
And understanding how domoic acid moves through the food web and impacts various species is crucial for developing effective strategies to mitigate its effects.
This whole discussion has really highlighted the interconnectedness of everything in the natural world, from microscopic algae to large marine mammals. And even us humans.
It truly does. Wow. And it underscores the importance of understanding and respecting these delicate balances in nature.
Speaking of understanding, what are scientists doing to learn more about domoic acid? And how to protect both human and animal health?
There is a lot of active research going on in this field. Scientists are studying the factors that trigger toxic algae blooms, developing methods for early detection, and monitoring of domoic acid levels. And exploring potential treatments for ASP.
Wow.
There's even research into developing drugs that could block the effects of domoic acid on the brain.
So it's a multifaceted approach. Tackling the problem from different angles.
Exactly.
That's encouraging to hear. But what about preventing these toxic algae blooms in the first place? Is that even possible?
It's a complex challenge. Algae blooms are a natural phenomenon. But certain human activities, like nutrient pollution from agricultural runoff and wastewater discharge, can exacerbate their growth. So reducing these sources of pollution is a crucial step in mitigating the risk of harmful algae blooms.
It seems like a lot of this comes down to our actions and how we manage our impact on the environment. But what about individual responsibility? Is there anything we can do in our daily lives to minimize our risk of domoic acid exposure?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Being informed is the first step. paying attention to public health advisories, knowing where your seafood comes from, and choosing seafood from reputable sources.
Are all ways to reduce your risk.
So knowledge is power, as they say. But what I find particularly fascinating about this whole story is how something so tiny, a single molecule like domoic acid, can have such a profound impact on the brain and behavior.
It is remarkable, isn't it?
It is.
It speaks to the incredible complexity and vulnerability of the human brain.
Right.
And highlights how even seemingly insignificant things in our environment can have far-reaching consequences.
Well, listeners, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the world of domoic acid.
Yep.
We've learned about its origins, its effects on the brain and behavior, the risks associated with seafood consumption, and the ongoing efforts to understand and mitigate its impact. But there's still so much more to explore.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll be back soon
with the final part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Where we'll delve deeper into some of the latest research on domoic acid.
Right.
And discuss what the future holds for this fascinating and sometimes frightening molecule.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to our deep dive into domoic acid.
Yeah.
We've been talking about this.
Right.
Scary neurotoxin. And how it can really mess with our memories.
Yeah. It's pretty potent stuff.
So last time, we left off with you saying that scientists are exploring some pretty cutting-edge treatments.
Yes, there's some really exciting research going on.
Like, can you tell me more about those antibodies you mentioned?
Well, antibodies are like these tiny little warriors in our immune system.
Okay.
They're proteins that can latch onto specific invaders, like viruses or bacteria, and mark them for destruction.
So scientists are trying to use these antibodies to target domoic acid.
Exactly. They're engineering antibodies that specifically recognize domoic acid and bind to it, preventing it from reaching those vulnerable glutamate receptors in the brain.
So it's like they're intercepting the toxin before it can do any damage.
That's the idea. It's still in the early stages of research.
Yeah.
But it holds a lot of promise for treating people who have been exposed to high levels of domoic acid.
That's amazing. So there might actually be a way to reverse or at least minimize
potentially, yes,
the effects of this poisoning.
It's definitely an area of active research, and there's a lot of hope for the future.
That's really encouraging to hear. But what about prevention?
Right.
You know, is there anything being done to stop these toxic algae blooms from happening in the first place?
Well, that's a bit more complicated.
Yeah.
Algae blooms are a natural phenomenon.
Right.
But certain human activities like nutrient pollution from agricultural runoff can make them worse.
So it's like we're feeding these blooms.
In a way, yes. Excess nutrients act like fertilizer for the algae, causing them to grow out of control.
So what can we do about that?
Well, there are a number of things. Reducing nutrient runoff from farms.
Okay.
Treating wastewater more effectively.
All right.
And even restoring natural habitats like wetlands.
Yeah.
Which can help filter out excess nutrients.
So it's a multi-pronged approach.
Exactly. It requires a combination of individual actions, policy changes, and technological innovations.
Sounds like a big challenge.
It is, but it's one we need to address.
Right.
Not just for human health, but for the health of our oceans as a whole.
It's amazing how something so small, like these tiny algae, can have such a huge impact.
It really is a testament to the interconnectedness of our planet. What happens on land ultimately affects our oceans, and vice versa.
So what can we as individuals do to protect ourselves?
A lot, actually. The first step is awareness.
Okay.
Knowing about the risks of domoic acid, paying attention to public health advisories, and choosing seafood from reputable sources that follow safety guidelines.
So knowledge is power when it comes to domoic acid.
Absolutely. The more we understand about this toxin, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves and our environment.
Well said. And I think that's a great note to end on for this part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
We'll be back soon to wrap up our exploration of domoic acid with some final thoughts and insights. Welcome back to our deep dive.
Yes, welcome back.
Into the world of domoic acid.
Right.
And we've been talking about this nasty neurotoxin and all the damage it can do.
Right.
But I'm really curious about what's being done to, like, fight back.
Yeah.
You know, against this tiny but powerful molecule.
Well, there's a lot of exciting research happening.
Okay.
One area I find particularly fascinating is the development of rapid detection methods for domoic acid.
Okay, yeah. You mentioned that before.
Right. Imagine a handheld device that could tell you instantly if shellfish is contaminated.
That would be amazing.
Right.
No more like waiting for lab results.
Exactly.
You'd know right away if it was safe to eat.
It would be a game changer for fishermen, seafood vendors, consumers.
What I find really fascinating about all this research is that, it's not just about domoic acid.
Right.
It's also shedding light on how our brains work.
By studying how domoic acid disrupts brain function, scientists are gaining a better understanding of glutamate receptors, their role in learning, memory, even in neurological diseases.
So this tiny toxin is giving us big clues about the mysteries of the brain.
Exactly. It's like this little molecule is holding up a mirror to the complexities of our own neurobiology.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It really is. And it's a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected discoveries can come from studying the things that harm us.
We've talked a lot about the science, but I think it's important to also remember the human impact of domoic acid poisoning.
For those who've experienced ASP, it's not just a scientific phenomenon. It's a life-altering event.
The memory loss, the other neurological symptoms, they can have a profound impact on people's lives.
Their relationships, their sense of self.
It's a reminder that beyond the science, there are real people whose lives are affected by this toxin.
I think that's a really important point.
Yeah. Well, listeners, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the world of domoic acid.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has. We've learned about its origins, its effects on the brain, the risks, and the ongoing research.
The efforts to understand and combat this tiny but mighty molecule.
But I think the biggest takeaway for me is just how interconnected everything is.
Absolutely. From microscopic algae to the complexities of the human brain to the health of our oceans. It's all intertwined.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we hope you're leaving with a sense of wonder, a thirst for knowledge, and maybe even a little bit of healthy respect for the power of nature.
And a reminder to always keep learning and exploring.
And on that note, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
See you then.